Welcome, friends, to another Wolf Responds. I want to talk to you today about the economics of the Iran war. So I'm going to call this presentation today, The War on Iran, a Losing Economic Proposition. And what I mean is I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to go through a list of the economic problems that have already been created by the war, 40 days of war, and now the last couple of weeks worth of ceasefire, if you like, if you believe it, and how all of these will get much, much worse literally every day that this war, or the ceasefire pause in the war, continues. Because as long as the Strait of Hormuz, that passage between the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf, as long as that's closed and the shipping that normally passes through there can't do so, all of the economic costs that I'm about to go through with you accumulate. And there's another reason why this ought to interest you. Because the pressure to bring this war to an end is a pressure above all on Donald Trump and his government. Because all around the world, the people suffering the economic costs of this war are increasingly suffering and therefore increasingly against the war, and they all know one fact. Before the United States and Israel attacked Iran, the Strait of Hormuz was open, and hundreds of ships filled with goods and services of all kinds passed through there every day without a problem. The United States and Israel attacked. Iran responded as it could with the really only real weapon they have, which is closing the Strait of Hormuz, which they can do. And here we are. So let's go. What are the economic costs? Well, one of the things produced there in that part of the world is helium, a very special gas that is crucial to the production of computer chips. In other words, every device, every computer, every AI, every you name it, is now based on computer chips. Not having the helium needed to produce them. That's how we produce them, with helium as a component. That's going to limit the distribution and the production and the availability of computer chips. And given a capitalist system, we all know what happens when there's a scarcity. The people who have their hands on that scarcity, the producers who can now produce less than they used to, take advantage of that problem they have by raising the price to all the rest of us. So the helium shortage will raise the prices of everything that has a computer chip in it, which is pretty much everything. Number two, for those of you who don't know, feeding the population of the world today, which is a much larger population than it was 50 or 100 years ago, required something called the Green Revolution that happened some years ago. It was a number of breakthroughs that happened around the same time in how to use fertilizer, something that crucially contains the element nitrogen. By adding that to the soil, you could dramatically increase the number of vegetables, the number of grains, and so on that come from an acre of land. And that would therefore allow you to feed the animals that make our meat and to feed us directly the vegetables, the rice, the pasta, the bread that we depend upon. In other words, the world's food supply depends on having massive amounts of nitrogen-based fertilizer available. Most of that fertilizer is produced by a process of changing petroleum. In other words, the oil that comes out of the ground can be chemically and otherwise processed to produce the fertilizer. And that's what goes on in the Middle East, where oil is so plentiful. And that has meant that the fertilizer produced there has to be shipped. Fertilizer is very bulky, as you know, has to be shipped in big tanker freight ships all over the world. But they have to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. just like the ships carrying the helium have to. And if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the ships carrying the helium, like the ships carrying the fertilizer, can't get through. In the northern half of the globe, planting happens now in April, March, April, May, for the summer growing season. If they don't have the fertilizer, there's going to be a shortfall in the available supply of food, particularly basic grains and so on. But all kinds of food will be affected. If there's a shortage of fertilizer, and there already is right now, then the people who produce and sell the fertilizer will raise the price. They shouldn't. It's not the moral thing to do, but in a way a capitalist system works. Shortage enables the seller to jack up the price. How much? As much as he can get away with. Just as much as you need to cover the extra price of the fertilizer or the helium. No. As much as you can. Because you have a wonderful excuse. Don't blame me. I'm only raising the price because the fertilizer is more expensive. The lovely excuse. But we're not done. Without petroleum, you can't produce oil. The kind of oil that runs your automobile. The kind of oil that heats your home. The many places to generate electricity. All of those things become complicated and difficult and more expensive, and that will mean your prices rise. But you know, there are places in the world that are already in trouble. In the Philippines, an island nation in Asia, in the Philippines, they just recently went from a 5-day to a 4-day work week and a 4-day school week. Why? Because it's good for business? No. It's good for education? No. It's because they have to save on oil for their buildings, oil for their machines, oil for people to get to work in their cars. They don't have it anymore. They have to conserve it. They're desperate. They're running out. They're reducing 5-day-a-week work to 4-day. That's the kind of reaction that's being taken. What's the next example? The next example is jet fuel. Turns out that airplanes need a much more developed version of petroleum than an automobile needs. You have to do things to petroleum to make gasoline, and you have to do even more to make jet fuel. Already, several airlines around the world have canceled flights. Some airlines are going out of business. They weren't doing well already, and this extra cost of jet fuel, because it's scarce, took them over the edge. The European official in Europe, in charge of supplies of jet fuel, said it this week, if there isn't a resolution to the war in Iran that reopens the Strait of Hormuz, Europe will run out of jet fuel in 6 weeks. That's the only amount of that they have in storage, in an inventory. At that point, said the official, hear me out, all airline traffic in Europe will stop. In other words, I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to bore you with more examples, although there are plenty more. You're now hearing the sentence that this is the greatest energy crisis